has no idea what she signed. My uncle said it like he was reading a weather report. Flat. Certain. Like my confusion was already a settled fact before I'd even opened my mouth. I didn't look at him. I looked at the attorney, a man named Mr. Juror Beckett, who had been my grandfather's lawyer for 30 years and who was now sitting across from me with his hands folded on top of a thick manila folder, waiting. There were 6 of us in that conference room. My Uncle Garrison on one side of the table with his wife and their oldest son, Theo, not the Theo in the used names list. A different one I'll explain in a second. Wait, no. Let me start over. Drop a yes in the comments if someone in your family has ever spoken about you like you weren't in the room. Like you were evidence in a case they were building against you. I want to know how many of us are sitting with that specific kind of quiet rage. My grandfather died in March. He built his money the slow way. 38 years running a commercial refrigeration company in Ohio, the kind of business that isn't glamorous, but keeps hospitals and grocery chains and restaurant kitchens running. He never talked about the money. He drove a 2009 Silverado until the transmission gave out. He wore the same 4 flannel shirts on rotation. He called me every Sunday at 7 p.m. and asked if I was eating enough vegetables. When he died, he left behind a company worth roughly $4.2 million and a house in Maplewood that my Uncle Garrison had been living in rent-free for 11 years. I didn't know about the rent-free part until the reading of the will. I also didn't know that 6 weeks before my grandfather died, while he was on oxygen and could barely lift a pen, someone had brought paperwork to his bedside. Paperwork that redirected controlling interest of the company to a family trust, a trust that conveniently named my Uncle Garrison as sole trustee. My grandfather's signature was on it. I am 31 years old. I have a master's degree in financial forensics, and I spent 4 years working for a firm that investigated insurance fraud. I know what a coerced signature looks like. I know what a document looks like when someone signs it because they're too tired to fight and too polite to say no. I recognized it the moment Mr. Beckett slid it across the table. But I didn't say anything. I just checked my watch, wrote down a number in the margin of my notepad, and let my uncle keep talking. Garrison is 12 years older than my mother, who passed away when I was 19. After she died, my grandfather became my closest family. Sunday calls, Christmases in Ohio, the occasional long weekend where I'd help him with inventory or sit in the office while he did payroll on a computer from 2006. He taught me to read a balance sheet on a yellow legal pad. He trusted me with things he didn't trust anyone else with, including, eventually, the combination to a small safe in his office closet. Garrison visited maybe twice a year. He lived in my grandfather's house, drove a car my grandfather paid the insurance on, and referred to the family business as our company, in a way that always made my grandfather go quiet. I noticed the quiet. I filed it away. When my grandfather got sick, really sick, lungs fast, I drove to Ohio and stayed for 6 weeks. Garrison showed up on day 3, stayed 4 days, left saying he had obligations. His son came once for an afternoon and spent most of it on his phone in the driveway. I was there for the last night. I held my grandfather's hand. He didn't say anything profound. He just said, "You know what's in the office." I thought he meant the filing system we'd organized together in January. Now I think he meant something else. The reading of the will was supposed to be straightforward. My grandfather had an estate attorney, Mr. Beckett, who had drawn up documents 2 years prior. The original will left the house to be sold, proceeds split between Garrison and me. The business was to be dissolved or sold within 18 months, with proceeds distributed equally. That was the will. But then, Mr. Beckett laid the trust document on the table, and the room changed. Due to an amendment executed in February, he said, choosing his words carefully, a family trust was established that supersedes the distribution terms. Controlling interest and operational authority over the company assets now reside with the trust. Mr. Garrison has been named trustee. Garrison leaned back in his chair. He didn't smile, but his shoulders dropped in a way that looked like relief. His wife reached over and touched his arm. What does that mean for me? I asked. As a named beneficiary of the trust, you would receive distributions at the trustee's discretion, Mr. Beckett said. He said it to the table, not to me. At the trustee's discretion. Garrison looked at me then, finally, and said, "She has no idea what she signed." He was talking to Mr. Beckett, like I was a piece of furniture that had asked an inconvenient question. I put my pen down. I looked at him. What did I sign? I said. The trust document. Your grandfather asked you to witness it. I had witnessed a document in February. My grandfather had asked me to sign as a witness to his signature. I'd assumed it was related to his medical directives, which we had updated in January. I signed where he pointed. I didn't read the full document because he'd asked me to hurry. Said he was tired, said Mr. Reft. Beckett would explain everything later. Mr. Beckett had never called me. I looked at the signature line. There was my name. Witness. Not a party to the document. Just confirmation that I'd watched him sign. I had watched him sign. I just hadn't known what he was signing. And this thought settled into me cold and clear, I hadn't known what had been placed in front of him to sign. I wrote one more number on my notepad, circled it. Then I folded my hands on the table exactly the way Mr. Beckett had folded his. Okay, I said. Walk me through the trust structure. Here's what I knew and what I'd known since January. My grandfather trusted Garrison the way you trust a dog that has bitten you before. You don't turn your back, but you keep it in the room because getting rid of it feels like more trouble than managing it. He'd loaned Garrison money 4 separate times over 20 years. None of it repaid. He'd co-signed on a business loan for a restaurant. Garrison opened in 2018 that closed in 2020. He paid the property taxes on the Maplewood house, which Garrison technically rented for $1 a year. He told me about all of this. Not in a complaining way, just in the way people tell you things when they want someone to remember them clearly. In January, when we organized the office together, I found a ledger, handwritten, going back 8 years. Every loan, every transfer, every gift. My grandfather's handwriting, tidy and careful. He saw me find it. He didn't take it from me. He let me read it for a long time, then said, I've been stupid about him. You've been kind, I said. They're not always different things, he said. That was January. He was sick, but still sharp, still himself. I photographed every page of that ledger. Then I went home to Chicago, and I started making calls. There's a very specific type of financial pressure that happens when a family member controls the flow of money you're theoretically entitled to. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just delay. Requests for documentation, sudden administrative fees, deadlines that move. Garrison started it within 3 weeks of the reading. He sent a letter, an actual paper letter, which I found almost charming, explaining that as trustee, he was conducting an audit of company liabilities before any distributions could be made. He estimated this would take 4 to 6 months. He called once, 2 weeks later. His wife was on the line too, unannounced, which told me everything about where the strategy was coming from. We just want to make sure you're taken care of, she said. I know, I said. I was pleasant. I was warm. I asked about their kids. I gave them nothing. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a while. Then I called a probate litigation attorney. This is the part where I need to be honest about something, because I've seen comments on stories like this and I know what people ask. Why didn't you just fight back immediately? Why didn't you freeze the account, get an injunction, something? Here's the reality. A trust, once executed, is incredibly hard to unwind. You need to prove either that the grantor lacked capacity or that the document was procured through undue influence. Both of those require evidence, medical records, witness testimony, pattern documentation. I didn't have enough yet, not in March, so I waited. I want to be clear about what waiting looked like. It wasn't passive. I was in contact with my attorney, a woman named, I keep wanting to give her a name and I'm going to restrain myself. I'll call her my attorney. She was methodical and expensive and worth every cent. We subpoenaed my grandfather's medical records from February. We tracked down the 2 nurses who had been on shift the night the document was signed. One of them remembered it. She remembered because it was late, nearly 10 p.m., and she'd thought it was unusual to have a notary at that hour. She remembered my grandfather asking twice what he was signing and being told it was just the trust update, like we discussed. She wrote that down in her personal notes because something felt wrong and she wasn't sure what to do about it. That note became evidence. Meanwhile, my grandfather's company was bleeding. Garrison had installed his son in an operations consulting role. The son, who had approximately 0 experience in commercial refrigeration, was billing the company $12,000 a month. Service contracts were being renegotiated downward. 3 long-term employees had quit. I had a fiduciary duty claim building on top of a capacity claim on top of an undue influence claim. The shape of a case was coming together, but I still needed the filing. And the filing needed timing. I want to tell you about the moment I understood exactly what I was dealing with. It was a Tuesday in May. I had driven to Maplewood to pick up some of my grandfather's personal items that I'd stored in the garage, photo albums, a few tools he'd promised me, a letter he'd written me when I graduated college that I'd left there by accident. Garrison knew I was coming. He said the garage would be unlocked. I got there to find his son sitting on the porch steps. He said, "My dad thought someone should be here." I said, "To do what?" He shrugged. He looked at his phone. I went to the garage. The boxes I'd stacked in the corner had been moved. Opened. The college letter was not where I'd left it. When I came back out, I asked him if anyone had gone through the garage. "I don't know anything about that," he said, without looking up. I drove to a parking lot 2 blocks away and sat in my car for 7 minutes. I was not okay. I want to be honest about that because the version of this story where I'm always cold and calculated and fine is a lie. I was not fine. I was furious and grieving and my hands were shaking. Then I took a breath. Then another. Then I opened my laptop and sent my attorney an email with one sentence: "I'm ready to file." We filed in August. The claim, undue influence in the execution of the February Trust Amendment combined with breach of fiduciary duty in Garrison's management of the trust assets. We included the nurse's testimony, the ledger photographs, the medical records showing my grandfather's oxygen saturation levels on the night of signing, and a forensic document analysis showing that the trust amendment had been printed on paper from a different batch than the other documents my grandfather had signed that month, meaning it had been prepared separately, brought in from outside. We also included billing records showing $47,000 paid to Garrison's son in the months since March, and a service contract that had been quietly renegotiated with the company's largest client, a regional hospital chain, at terms that reduced annual revenue by $380,000. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in October. I wore a gray blazer. I sat at the petitioner's table. I put one folder in front of me. Blue. I don't know why I keep buying blue folders. It's a compulsion. Garrison arrived with his attorney, a man who projected the specific confidence of someone who has never lost a case he cared about. He was not sweating. He was very put together. His wife sat in the gallery. His son was there too, wearing a suit that fit slightly wrong across the shoulders. The judge was a woman, mid-60s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the expression of someone who has presided over a great deal of human foolishness and is no longer surprised by any of it. She reviewed the preliminary filings. She asked Garrison's attorney to summarize the defense. The defense was, essentially, that my grandfather had been of sound mind, that the trust reflected his genuine wishes, and that I was a grieving granddaughter who didn't understand estate law and was trying to reliquidate a decision my grandfather had made freely. "She's contesting a document she herself witnessed," Garrison's attorney said. "Her credibility here is, I witnessed his signature," I said. "I didn't witness what he was told he was signing." The judge looked at me. "You'll have your turn, Ms. Of course, I'm sorry, Your Honor." I sat back. I opened my folder. I was not looking at Garrison, but I was aware of him the way you are aware of a window with a drafty seal. A cold, thin presence at the edge of the room. The nurse testified via written statement, which was read into the record. The forensic document examiner testified in person. The paper batch discrepancy is the kind of detail that sounds small until it doesn't. Until you realize that a document being prepared separately, printed on different paper, brought in at 10 o'clock at night, means that it was not part of a planned, discussed, transparent process. It was an insertion. Garrison's attorney challenged the paper analysis. He called it circumstantial. He said my grandfather had multiple attorneys and documents could have originated from different offices. "Do you have documentation from the other office?" the judge asked. He did not. We introduced the medical records. Oxygen saturation at 83% on the night of signing. A note from the attending physician indicating my grandfather was on increased sedation for comfort following a difficult afternoon. Garrison's attorney pivoted. He said my grandfather had good days and bad days. And this had been a good day, and that the nurse's recollection was imperfect and possibly motivated by... He didn't finish the sentence. The judge gave him a look that finished it for him. Then Garrison himself stood up. His attorney had advised against this, I found out later. But Garrison wanted to speak. That was always his problem. He needed to explain himself. He needed people to understand that he was not a villain, that he deserved what he'd taken, that there was a logic to his choices that justified everything. Some people cannot stay quiet, even when quiet would save them. "She was never here," he said. He was talking about me, looking at the judge. "I am the one who was present. I helped him for years. I took care of the house. I managed the property. She showed up for 6 weeks at the end, and now she's acting like she knew him best. The judge let him finish. I opened my folder to the third page. Your Honor, I said, I'd like to submit communications logs between my grandfather and myself over the past 4 years, specifically phone records showing contact every single Sunday and emails between us regarding company operations, financials, and estate planning, some of which directly reference his concerns about the Maplewood property. I passed the documents to the bailiff, including, I said, an email from my grandfather to me dated January 28th of this year, 6 weeks before the trust amendment was signed, in which he writes that he is worried about making sure things go where they should, and that he doesn't want anyone to be able to change what he'd already decided. I looked at Garrison for the first time that day. He wasn't confused, he was afraid. The room went quiet in a specific way. Not the silence of shock, the silence of recognition. Even Garrison's wife, who had been sitting with careful composure, looked at the table. Garrison's attorney requested a recess. The judge denied it. I'd like to hear from the petitioner, she said. Continue. This is the part of the story where I want to be careful, because I've thought a lot about what I actually wanted out of this. I didn't want Garrison in prison. I want to be honest about that. He's 71 years old, and he has been, in his way, defined entirely by what he felt he was owed by my grandfather and the world. That is its own kind of prison, and I have no interest in building a different one. What I wanted was the company protected. The employees, 11 of them, most of whom had been there for more than a decade, protected. And the truth on record, an official, documented, legally binding truth. We won on undue influence. The judge found that the totality of evidence, the timing, the medical records, the witness account, the document discrepancy, the ledger history, my grandfather's January email, established clear and convincing evidence that the trust amendment had been executed under conditions that compromised my grandfather's free will. The amendment was voided. The original will was reinstated. Garrison was removed as trustee, and a neutral third-party administrator was appointed to manage the estate through distribution. His attorney filed an objection. The judge noted it and moved on. Then I handed Garrison's attorney the second folder. This one was about the company. In the months since March, while the trust audit was supposedly ongoing, Garrison had made 4 decisions that I believe he thought were irreversible. The renegotiated hospital contract, the consulting fees for his son, the hiring of a new operations manager, a friend of Garrison's wife at a salary $40,000 above the previous one, and the quiet non-renewal of the company's liability insurance, apparently to reduce overhead. A company with no liability insurance and a renegotiated $380,000 revenue gap is not being managed. It is being harvested. The second folder contained a demand for fiduciary accounting and an emergency injunction to freeze all company financial activity pending the appointment of the neutral administrator. The company has 11 employees, I said to the judge. 3 of them have been there over 20 years. If this is allowed to continue at current trajectory, the company will be insolvent within 18 months. The judge read the injunction request. Granted, she said. Garrison said something under his breath that his attorney touched his arm to stop. I didn't ask what it was. We left the courthouse at 12:40 in the afternoon. My attorney walked beside me and didn't say anything until we reached the parking structure, and then she said, That email from January was the whole case, you know. I know, I said. How did you know to save it? I thought about my grandfather, the way he'd looked in the office in January, sitting across from me with the ledger open between us. The careful way he chose his words. The way he'd said, I've been stupid about him, with such exhausted precision, like a man who had been waiting years to say it to someone who would understand. He knew what was coming. He was telling me to pay attention. He wrote it in January, I said. I just didn't understand what I was reading until March. The neutral administrator took over in November. He commissioned an independent company valuation. The business, once the consulting fees were stopped and the hospital contract was renegotiated back to market rates, stabilized within 2 quarters. The estate distribution proceeded according to the original will. The house sold in February, a slow market, but it sold. Garrison did not contest the final distribution. His attorney sent a letter saying he reserved the right to pursue claims at a later date. I filed it in a drawer. His son lost the consulting contract. He has not, to my knowledge, found new employment in commercial refrigeration. I can't tell you, I feel very bad about that. The 3 employees who had quit, 2 of them came back when the new management structure was in place. One of them sent me a card. It said, Thank you for keeping the lights on, and I keep it in my desk. Here is what I think about now when I think about that year. I think about the specific cowardice of doing something to a dying person because you believe they are too weak to fight back. There is a particular calculation in that. A reading of someone's vulnerability as permission. It requires you to look at a person you have known your whole life and decide that their diminishment means they are no longer owed the truth. My grandfather was not diminished. He was sick. Those are not the same thing. His mind was working. He was afraid and tired, and he had made mistakes over decades that he was trying to correct. And someone came in at 10 o'clock at night with a document and told him it was just an update. He signed it. He didn't know what he was signing. He knew something was wrong. He told me in January in 100 indirect ways to be ready. I was ready. I am still in Chicago. I still have the same apartment, the same coffee maker, the same slightly chaotic system for organizing my files that makes perfect sense to me and no sense to anyone else. I think about calling my grandfather on Sundays sometimes. The reflex doesn't go away, it just sits there. 7 p.m. on Sunday. I usually make tea instead. I kept one thing from the office, the yellow legal pad where he first showed me how to read a balance sheet. It's not framed or anything. It's in a drawer, but I know it's there. Peace doesn't always look like a moment of triumph. Sometimes it just looks like knowing that what he built is still standing. That 11 people still have jobs, that the record shows what actually happened. That's enough. Sometimes it's more than enough. I've thought a lot about what the word patience actually means, because I used to think it meant waiting without feeling anything, that it was a kind of emptiness you trained yourself into. I don't think that anymore. Patience, the real kind, is waiting while you feel everything, the anger, the grief, the specific humiliation of being spoken about like you aren't in the room, and choosing not to let any of it make your decisions for you. That's not emptiness. That's the hardest kind of full. Garrison made a bet. He looked at me across that conference room table in March, and he calculated that my grief would make me slow, that my youth would make me inexperienced, that my gender would make me easy to dismiss, and that the combination of all three would make me manageable. He was wrong about all of it, but I think the most important thing he was wrong about was this. He thought that because I had never made noise, I had never been paying attention. I had been paying attention for years. My grandfather taught me that, not in any formal way. He never sat me down and said, "Here is a lesson about how the world works." He just let me sit in the room. He handed me ledgers. He answered my questions without making me feel stupid for asking them. He modeled, over decades, what it looks like to build something quietly and protect it carefully and not need anyone outside that room to validate what you know. That kind of education doesn't come with a certificate. It comes with a yellow legal pad and a Sunday phone call and a man who said, "I've been stupid about him," with such precise, exhausted honesty that I understood instantly. He was also saying, "Don't be stupid about this." I wasn't. What I want people to understand, and I think about this when I consider what Garrison actually lost, is that the consequences he faced were not punishment from some outside force. They were the direct result of the choices he made, compounding over time. He spent 11 years treating my grandfather's house like his own. He borrowed money he never returned. He installed his son in a role the company couldn't support. He brought a document to a sick man's bedside at 10 o'clock at night. Each of those choices narrowed the path in front of him until the path ran out. I didn't do that to him. He did it to himself, one decision at a time, over years. I think that's the thing worth sitting with. Not the courtroom moment, not the judge's ruling, not even the injunction. It's the accumulation. Every small compromise a person makes with their own integrity adds weight they eventually have to carry. And at some point, the weight becomes the whole story. I carried something too that year. Grief that didn't have a clean shape. Anger I had to manage carefully so it didn't make me reckless. The very specific loneliness of knowing something is wrong and not yet having the evidence to prove it. That weight was real. I'm not pretending it wasn't. But I knew what my grandfather had tried to tell me. I knew what he built and why it mattered and for whom. And knowing that gave me something to be disciplined toward, which is different from just being angry. Anger burns fast. Purpose is slower, and it lasts longer, and it doesn't leave you empty when it's done. The company is still running. 11 people still have jobs. The record shows what happened. That's what I worked for. That's what he would have wanted me to work for.